Hello and welcome into Big Ten Today. So glad to have you here alongside the Michigan legend, Jake Butt. I'm Kylen Mills. We are just about 2 weeks away from the kickoff to the college football season. This Big Ten season is going to be unlike any other, with 18 teams vying for the conference title. I'm ready for football season. I don't know if I'm ready for fall, Jake. Starbucks is supposed to debut their fall menu in just about a week.
That means the pumpkin spice lattes, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You know, I played tight end. I like to consider myself a tough guy.
Yeah.
I love pumpkin spice lattes. I had my first one last year. All fall I was putting them down, but it is a little too early. It's still a little too hot out for that.
Yeah, it's warm out across the Midwest, but hey, no shame in enjoying a good PSL. Well, as we're ramping up to the football season, all the preseason lists are coming out, and that's going to be today's big story. The Athletic released their college football preseason All-Americans. 13 Big Ten players were named to this prestigious list, and once again, that's today's big story. A total of 100 players were recognized, 50 first-team players, 50 second-team selections, 7 from the Big Ten made that first team, and this was selected by a panel of editors from The Athletic. Jake, you've been named an All-American yourself. For those of us who will never have a brush with that type of athletic greatness, can you put into perspective just how difficult it is to be named an All-American in college football?
Well, it's a great award. It is prestigious, and it's difficult really just because of the depth in college football. You know, you talk about how many teams, there is across the country, how many great players, and there's just only a few spots. But, looking at this list, I wouldn't be surprised if any of these guys, all these guys are capable of being All-Americans. But when you try to project which one's going to stick or not, it also depends, to that point, on the depth of those position groups across the conference.
Anything can change in any moment in sports. You've got injuries, you've got so many factors at play. When you look at that list of those players who are named to the Athletics All-American preseason team, who do you feel like are the no-doubt All-Americans in your mind?
Well, if I have a chance to recognize a tight end, I'm going to take that chance.
Okay, of course.
And it's even better when it's a tight end from my alma mater, Colston Loveland. But really, he's the first lock, can't miss. And, you think about it, he's a first-round pick. He's likely to win the Mackey, in my opinion. He will be a first-team All-American, but I think the other piece of this is the system. And understanding Michigan is replacing their top 2 wide receivers, they're replacing a ton of offensive linemen, they'll be introducing a new quarterback. I would be shocked if Colston Loveland, it would be a travesty if he doesn't get 70-plus targets on the season, 60-plus catches. I think he has a chance to about 750 yards to break the career receiving yards record at Michigan. This guy is just a complete tight end, and I think Michigan's going to need to lean on him if they want to have success. 6-7 targets a game, I think, has to happen. And just to continue real quick with the rest of the Michigan guys, they got some studs. Mason Graham is the best interior defensive lineman in college football. I think he's a top 15 pick. Will Johnson, the best cornerback in college football. I think he's also a top 15 pick. So at the top, Michigan has some of the best at their position that I think are certainly locks to be All-Americans.
Do you feel like the Wolverines are underrated a little bit this year? There's been so much talk about Ohio State, Oregon finishing at the top of the conference, but you just already pointed out the amount of talent on this Michigan roster. Despite, yes, you lose some key pieces like running back Blake Corum, you've got a new head coach. Do you feel like they could be, I don't want to say a sleeper because they're the reigning national champions, but do you feel like they could overperform expectations?
They could, but so much of this is going to depend, right? They haven't even announced who their starting quarterback will be. And, they're going to play Fresno State week 1, which historically, that's a dangerous team. And they're going to be playing for their coach who just retired this offseason. We're going to learn a lot in that game, but we're especially going to learn a lot week 2 when they play Texas at that point, because we'll get to see who is the quarterback and how do they play against the elite teams. At that point, and we'll talk about this game later in the show. At that point, we're going to have a much better idea of, where Michigan's going. But I do want to point out, Ohio State is loaded with talent. Okay, so you could go across their whole defense effectively. There's a ton of guys on offense. I think Ibuka was named second-team All-American by this list. They have a ton of guys, but Caleb Downs at safety, I think, is a lock. I think he's the best at his position for a young guy, and maybe one of the most impactful transfer additions of the entire offseason. And Jim Knowles, the Buckeye defensive coordinator, he runs a 3-safety system. That position is absolutely key for the Buckeyes' defensive success, and they got one of the best guys in the country doing it in Caleb Downs. I think that guy's going to be all over the field making plays. To me, you can just go ahead and Sharpie him, and he's going to be a first-team All-American as well.
To your point about Ohio State's defensive depth, a name not on this list is cornerback Denzel Burke. who I could easily see being on that. Now, I know we're going to get into some of your picks who are not on this list here in just a moment, but Ohio State, to me, could have an entire slew of players who are named All-Americans.
And that's why there's such excitement in Columbus this year. You know, Urban Meyer has coached some great football teams. We know that, right? And then this offseason, he's, given an answer to the media saying this is the most talented team he had ever seen. I mean, think about some of the teams he's coached, at Florida, at Ohio State even. And he said, this is the most talented roster. That's all the buzz. So maybe the only thing that could hurt them is there's only one football. So when everyone's so talented, it could kind of hurt your production in a sense. But at the end of the day, I think all the Buckeyes, at least what I'm hearing, they don't care about individual awards. They are not interested in that. They want to win. They want to win at the highest level, and it's going to take their best players playing at the highest level.
It is a unique but a good challenge for a coach when you have so many mouths that have to be fed. But how do you keep all of those talented players engaged when you do have so many options?
Maybe that's where these past few years will benefit them. Because I know this from my experience at Michigan. My first 2 years, we went 7-6, 5-7. By the time our third and fourth year rolled around, guys were just tired of losing. You know what? I'll play a horrible game, and as long as we win, I'll feel better than playing a great game and a loss. And I think that's where Ohio State's at. They seem to have a chip on their shoulder, like there's something to prove. That entire defense could get all conference honors this year. And then, we'll talk about some of the guys not on this list here in a second. They have a ton of playmakers on offense with one of the best offensive minds calling plays in Chip Kelly. So this year has a chance to be full of fireworks for the Buckeyes.
Are there any other players from the Big Ten you feel like are no doubt All-Americans before we move on?
Yeah, I'm shocked that there's not a single Big Ten running back on this list. And Ohio State has two guys that could be on this list in Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson. We talk about Caleb Downs as an impact transfer. So is Judkins. I mean, seriously, he's in that conversation as one of the best running backs in all of college football. And Travion Henderson, he's just been plagued by injuries. When he's healthy, he's one of the best backs in college football. So either of those guys or both those guys could be on the list. And Chip Kelly has coordinated some great run schemes as well. They're going to be running the ball a lot more than people might expect. I also think Donovan Edwards and Kyle Monungai, who led the Big Ten in rushing last year, I keep saying he's one of the most underrated players. It would be understanding the identity of the Big Ten. I'd be absolutely shocked if there wasn't a running back on that list.
I do want to ask about a name that you did not mention as one of your locks to be an All-American, and that's Oregon quarterback Dillon Gabriel coming in, transferring from Oklahoma. You look at the resume, you look at the numbers, he's one that maybe to the untrained eye you'd expect to be an All-American lock, ranked tied for fourth in the NCAA in career total touchdowns.
Yeah.
But you're not entirely sold. Why do you think that may not be a lock for Dillon Gabriel?
It has nothing to do with Dillon Gabriel. Everything you just said is factual. I look at Bo Nix coming from Auburn to Oregon and what that system meant for his career. I expect a similar jump for Dillon Gabriel. But again, to go back to your first question, the challenge of being an All-American in college football is there's over 100 teams. And there's other teams like Carson Beck from Georgia. That's a Heisman candidate. Quinn Ewers from Texas, that's a Heisman candidate. Even Shedeur Sanders, the quarterback for Colorado, that's a Heisman. So there's depth at that quarterback position, and it makes me a little bit more hesitant to say that he's for sure going to be an All-American when I know Colston Loveland is the best at his position. Caleb Downs is the best at his position. Mason Graham, Will Johnson, those guys are all clear in the lead at their positions.
One advantage that Gabriel does have is the fact that Oregon led the nation in passing last year, so you'd expect this to be a system where he'll have the opportunity to shine. But one follow-up I did want to ask you about on Gabriel is, will there be any transition period? This is a guy who's played in big games. He's shown that he can rise to the occasion, but it's still a new environment, new teammates. Like, what do you expect from him out of the gate in week one?
I expect him to be playing at an All-American level, just to continue with that theme. You say in real estate, you say location, location, location. And I think for quarterbacks, the same is true, and it has a lot to do with fit. And Bo Nix, coming from Auburn to Oregon, he increased his completion percentage by nearly 20%. That is a significant jump. It gives us clues that, being a veteran quarterback in this system, he'll have a ton of success. He's also got great wide receivers. One guy that could be on this list is wide receiver Tez Johnson. Filled up the stat sheet last year, broke the single-season reception record, and then he's got two great tackles as well. So when you're bringing in a new quarterback, you would love to surround him with talent and experience so he can go realize his full potential. That's what Dan Lanning has done. That's why Oregon is not just going to have a great year this year. They're a player in the conference title conversation and the national title conversation for many years to come. Dylan Gabriel will be a big piece of that equation this fall.
Check off all the boxes. Wide receiving core, good line. He should be set up for success, certainly, in this system. Are there any other players from around the Big Ten that you look at and say this could be a big breakout year, or this is someone who could maybe surprise some folks come the end of the season and be named an All-American?
Yeah, I look at Ohio State's entire defensive line. JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer, either of those guys could make it. Michigan, Kenneth Grant could make it. But then I go across the conference and I say, how about Dylan Thieneman? We could give some love to Dylan Thieneman, the safety from Purdue. He was a freshman All-American last year. He was third-team AP All-American already. And in that Ryan Walters defense, the position he plays is in position to make plays. And he proved last year as a true freshman, that guy's going to make a ton of plays. I read all offseason about how he is, he's coming out to practice 30 minutes early. He's staying an hour late. No one watches more film than him. So this guy's going into his sophomore year, coming off a explosive freshman year, and yet he's still hungry for more. It feels like a safe bet that Thieneman's going to be in that position, in that conversation at least, to be All-American.
Who are your sleepers? I want to know, who is someone that's not on the radar right now? And I'm going to make you rack your brain on this one, but who's someone who's maybe not on the radar that you're like, I've seen this player up close in person. This is someone I could see really excelling this year that maybe has gone a little bit unnoticed.
Kenneth Grant, the defensive lineman for Michigan, I think of all players in the conference, this is a guy that's going to rise up draft boards. We talk about Mason Graham, and certainly rightfully so, but I think a lot of people just stop there and say, wow, they got one great defensive lineman.
Yep.
Kenneth Grant is a freak of all freaks. I mean, this guy's like a double-wide refrigerator, but he runs down Penn State running backs. He's quick enough to win in the pass rush game, but he's strong and built enough to win against double teams. At the end of this season, I think we're going to look at Michigan as having the best interior defensive lineman duo in college football, similar to what Texas had last year. I think Michigan has a chance to have both those guys be first rounders in next year's draft.
Wow. And that was actually one follow-up I had for you is possible NFL picks coming out of this class from the Big Ten. But Mason Graham, Michigan defensive tackle, already has been named one of the best interior defenders, not just in the conference, but in the entire country. What's it going to take for those two to solidify their names on those draft boards?
I watched the tape. They already have. In the biggest moments last year, Mason Graham against Alabama in the Rose Bowl showing up and having key stops.
Huge stop in overtime.
And then you watch Washington, and those guys are just constantly in the backfield making plays, making opposing quarterbacks uncomfortable. So I think it's just a matter now of having the volume of the season to get more of that national recognition, particularly for Grant, because Mason Graham already has it. And then just to keep it full circle, we're going back and forth with Ohio State, Michigan. I'm going to just throw a freshman out there, Jeremiah Smith. I got a football crush on this guy. I mean, he's 6'3", 220 pounds. He's built like an NFL wide receiver. Ryan Day's trying to say, hey, calm down a little bit, guys. Let's slow down. I can't slow down. I think he's going to have an amazing year. Ibuka's wide receiver one. He's a veteran guy.
Sure.
But don't be surprised when there's 5 or 6 weeks where Jeremiah Smith goes for 100-plus yards. He's a mature guy that is a professional already. I'm excited to watch him play as well.
So how do you define a football crush? Where do you draw the line? Is it just you really admire the play, the person? What?
When I watch him, I get warm and fuzzy. I get
you get butterflies.
I'm watching on my iPad, and my wife is like, "Why are you smiling so big?" And I'm like, "Come here, look at this guy." I don't have game tape, but I get to see the tape that Ohio State puts out, and that dude's making a highlight play all spring long. You just start to think, man, this is going to be a fun season to watch this guy do what he does.
I love that, though. Your wife doesn't have any reason to worry, hey, why are you smiling at the phone? Something weird might be going on. No, you're just watching football. You're
Look at this route.
Right?
Look at this route. Yeah.
Look at this. All right, well, Jake, we'll check in with you here in just a bit. Right now, though, we step aside for a quick break here on Big Ten Today.